I'm pretty sure that this evening David Anderson in his keynote speech will talk about that. That Kanban is for knowledge management and it's for especially for creative knowledge management. Now that's a very big statement to make. Knowledge management is very broad, right? I think everybody here in the room is doing knowledge management. Some of you are knowledge managers that are helping other knowledge managers, right? Or knowledge management, knowledge work, I mean, knowledge work. So some of you are knowledge workers that are helping other knowledge workers. So it's a very broad concept, knowledge work. And we claim that Kanban is a system for a method for managing knowledge work, which is kind of a big claim. So what I want to do is to look into that, yeah? To see how Kanban is really something that helps to manage knowledge work. So first off, I think it's important to look at what is knowledge work. Okay. So in general, my definition is like knowledge work is solving hard problems, solving problems that may not have been solved before in unfamiliar situations. But the hardest problem of all is the problem of finding out which problem to solve. Yeah? Finding out which piece of software is important, finding out which customers are important, finding out which customer problem is important. Yeah? So it's about finding out about or solving hard problems, but the hardest problem of it all is finding out which problems are relevant to solve. Now that makes a good distinction. With that definition, I think we have a good distinction between what I call delivery and what is called discovery. And my focus obviously will be more on the discovery side. Yeah? So this delivery, in terms of the definition that I have of knowledge work, is exploiting existing knowledge, solving problems in familiar situations. Okay? So that's what I call delivery, and I'll give some examples of that. Discovery, on the other hand, is exactly about finding out which problem to solve or creating solutions for problems that have not been solved before. Okay, so software development. Software development is clearly knowledge work, right? So this is a picture I've taken. I've copied from Alistair Coburn. Because he talks about this, he talks about how we need to look at software development as knowledge work. And then in the Kanban training, for example, we talk about software development as a knowledge discovery process. So it's clearly this knowledge work, right? It's not just delivering stuff, but if you look at the process and you focus on the right thing in the process, it's also about discovering information, discovering information about how to design things, discovering information of how to code things, and so on and so further. So it clearly software is a knowledge work, is knowledge work. Strange. So there's a delivery part to it. Yeah? There's the delivery part in terms of delivering features, delivering change requests, delivering fixes to production defects. So that's what we deliver in software development, but that's only one part of it, right? There is a discovery. So I did something wrong with the pointer, I guess. Ah, voila. Okay. So there is a discovery. There's a discovery also. What we need to discover when we're delivering software or delivering products in general is it feasible? Can we make it? Do we have the technology to make it? Right? Is it desirable? Will the users like it? Right? And most important of all, is it viable? Will it produce an outcome that will produce money for us? Right? Will it produce a viable business for us. So there's the delivery part, there's the discovery part. So knowledge, software development and product development in general is knowledge work. So Kanban helps to deal with in this area. Kanban helps us to deal with reality, right? So in the ideal world, in the ideal world, work flows without too much friction. The keynote of this morning talked about small teams. In small teams, obviously, the work flows very rapidly. Yeah, people collaborate, it all flows. So we can ponder, we can imagine, and we can discuss a lot about that ideal world. Yeah, and we want to approach that ideal world. But obviously, in many cases, especially if we're talking about larger organizations, that ideal world is somewhat different from the real world. Yeah? In the real world, work doesn't just flow without friction. There's many different types of friction, right? There is silos, organizational silos, company politics, scale, communication, low communication bandwidth, specialist resources. If you looked at my picture of software development as a knowledge process, there's UX designers, there's developers, there's product owners, so there's specialist resources. And the biggest friction of it all is the friction of resistance to change. Yeah? There's even a friction in terms of changing towards the ideal situation. So there's lots of friction in the real world. Now Kanban is a way of dealing with that friction in the present. Yeah? So Kanban does help us to deal with that friction in our today's situation, but also helps us to connect with the future, also helps to move towards a more ideal situation. So that's what I think is very special about Kanban. And if I talk about using Kanban in knowledge work, this is what I keep as my as a thing that I want to strive for. The reason why is that for today's organizations, this is the big challenge for many of these organizations. For many of the organizations today, this is the big challenge. How do you cope with your current present? In many organizations, that current present is again, as the keynote talked about, hierarchy, pushing work, living in an analog world. Yeah? But how do we connect with the future? This digital future, this networked organization, this organization where everything is pull. So that's the big challenge for many organizations, dealing with your current present while connecting with your future. And I think the basic capability that Kanban brings into your organization is a basic capability to actually deal with that. Okay, so that's the big challenge, I think. Shared visual understanding, one of the core elements of Kanban, is an important aspect of that. It's an important element for dealing with the present and moving towards the future. Yeah. So shared visual understanding makes that, especially if multiple people are involved, more than one person is involved, yeah, it creates an environment where people can look at it, manipulate it, and can collaborate around something. And this is something that we've been successful with in the delivery part of knowledge work, right? If we're going to move towards the discovery, then again, I want to keep that. I want to make sure that we have that same thing. Now, there's more than shared visual understanding. There's obviously also all the core practices, the foundational principles in the core practices, in terms of it's not about just visualization, it's about limiting your work in progress, managing the flow, creating feedback loops, and continuous improvement, right? So those are also important if we want to talk about Kanban, not just in the delivery part, but also in the discovery part. So the current Kanban system that most people are familiar with They deal to a certain extent with knowledge work. If you're talking about, for example, a Kanban system for software development, they deal with knowledge work, but in my opinion, most of the time our focus is too much on the work, right? We talk about work items. So this is a typical Kanban system. Kanban board ready for development, development testing ready for UAT, and then user acceptance testing, and then done, right? We talk about the items on the board as work items. Yeah, we talk about limiting work in progress. Yeah? So this is an indication that maybe the Kanban systems that we're talking about today, they support knowledge work, yeah? But they only support one part of knowledge work, which is the delivery side. Okay. So I will talk about, to refer to these types of Kanban systems as delivery Kanban. Yeah, delivery Kanban. Okay. Now, obviously, knowledge work, especially knowledge work at scale, yeah, is more than just work. Yeah? It also is about decisions that you need to make, information that needs to be discovered, options that you need to evaluate. So that's much more than work alone, right? There is, especially if we move from delivery to discovery, yeah, these things become more and more important, right? These things become more and more important. And especially when moving from delivery to discovery, and then the question is, how does this affect our conception, or how does this affect how we understand flow? Is this like embedded in the flow of the work, all these things? Yeah? Or do we need separate visualizations for these things? Do we need separate visualizations for the decisions that we make? Do we need separate visualizations for the options that we create and manage? Yeah? So if we're going into the discovery side, then the big question for me is, do we need other types of Kanban systems that support that? Okay. So let me give an example, just to make it more concrete. So let me give an example. This is an upstream Kanban. Okay. So I've shown a delivery Kanban, which is it's mainly the focus of the delivery Kanban is the focus of the development team, right? It's the focus on the development part. This is a Kanban system or a Kanban board that focuses on everything that happens upstream before you start the actual development. Yeah. So you could consider it as kind of a structured backlog, right? So what it visualizes is all the things that happen before you actually have a specification that a team can commit to start developing. So you start with ideas, you turn those ideas into concepts, right? And then you turn those concepts into specifications. So for example, if you're an agile team, this means that you start with some suggestions, ideas, you turn them into story maps, which are concepts, and then from those story maps you derive user stories with acceptance criteria that can be developed. The reason why we have an upstream Kanban system for this is that because we don't want to do this all in one big batch. We want to do this in a continuous flow, so that we have a continuous flow of user stories entering into the development team. Okay. Who has used a similar type of upstream Kanban? Yeah, so. Yeah.
More like a pyramid.
More like a pyramid. Yeah. Okay.
So where people were not very, say that, they were not very open to new ideas yet.
Yeah.
The future probably will be using something like that.
Yes.
They had people in the middle management that probably will be using this kind of Kanban, but the upper management
Yes.
are not very.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Okay. So, in your case, who's using the pyramids?
Well, we use it before the development team.
Exactly.
Usually this is done by the management.
Exactly.
But everyone can participate, so
Yeah.
the core team is able to specify
Yeah.
new ideas
Yes.
with that background.
Exactly.
But it's different because it has a similar concept. The difference is that it has more input from the customer and whatnot, so it also outlines where we stand in terms of the relationship with the customer.
Yes. Yeah. So the primary audience for this would be the product owner, if you're talking about an agile team, but the product owner not alone, because we talk about collaboration. That's why we do a visualization, because people can collaborate around this. So it would be product owner together with representative users, with the business, with stakeholders, but also with the input from the team, right? Because it's also a visualization in which the team can contribute. So this is a visualization that helps to get a collaboration going around what traditionally would be called the business analysis or the analysis phase. All the work that is happening upstream. Okay, so what this visualization does, the upstream Kanban, is helping to go from fragmented ideas that can come from all types of different places, moving them into sort of concepts like story maps, for example, and then move them into coherent specifications. The process that is visualized here is not, the items that are on board are not just work. They don't represent work. What they represent is options that you can select from. If you look at the overall process that is visualized here, it's not a linear process of first we do some analysis, then we do some design, then we do some implementation. It's rather a process of selection. We start with many ideas, but then not all these ideas will be turned into concepts, and not all these concepts will actually turn into specifications, especially not at the same time, right? And not all these specifications will actually be developed, right? It's only when the team commits to a certain work item that a certain idea is actually started to be developed. So what we see here on the Kanban board is not work items, but it's options. It's the options that we have and that we select from in terms of moving towards a commitment for development. So it's kind of a process of selection, so it's a convergent process. We start with many options, and then we diminish it up until the commitment point where we actually start developing. Okay. So it's not just a visualization. If we have a selection process, then we need to make sure that we start with enough ideas. Yeah. If we don't start with enough ideas, we might not have enough concepts. And if we don't have enough concepts, we might not have enough specifications. And if we don't have enough specifications, the development team might be out of work, right? So it's a selection process. So that means that rather than having work in progress limits, maximum limits of the amount of work that we want to do at the same time, here we need to have minimal option limits. Right? We need to have limits that say at least we want to start with 15 ideas, and then we need to move towards at least 10 concepts, and we need to make sure that at all times we have 6 specifications, user stories with acceptance criteria or requirements, whatever. We need to have 6 specifications ready at all times. Because if we don't have them ready, the development team might be starving, might be out of work, right? So oftentimes in teams that I work with, I see that the bottleneck is in the team. There's too much work for the team to do. Yeah? But sometimes the bottleneck is also upstream, right? Sometimes the bottleneck is upstream. There's always enough work, but is the work well prepared enough, right? Do we have the proper specifications for doing the work, okay? So that's what we're trying to cover with the upstream Kanban, is to make sure that the upstream process delivers the right quality of user stories or requirements, and that at all times we have enough work that is ready to be committed by the development team. Okay. Is this a Kanban system? Is this a Kanban system? Yeah? Why is it the Kanban system? Sorry?
It's because you call it Kanban.
Because it's called Kanban. It has a flow. There's a certain flow. We move from the left to right. There's a visualization. There's limits.
Might be the other way around.
Yeah. Sorry?
Is it a pull system?
Is it a pull system? Is it a pull system? Yeah. Good question. Is this a pull system? Even in the presence of minimum limits? Yeah. In practice, what I see in practice is that it's more driven by a certain cadence. Yeah. There's a certain cadence of having workshops to work on your stories, having workshops of developing story maps, developing user stories. It's in many cases it's more driven by a cadence, right? But still, I think it's very close to a proper Kanban system, except that rather than having work visualized, here we visualize the options that we have that we can select from. Instead of having work in progress limits, we have minimal options.
Yeah, why not both? You could have both.
Yeah, you can have both.
Then it will be a pull system, then it will be a Kanban system.
Yeah, and we have both. We have the upstream Kanban, which is more about preparing the work, and we have the downstream Kanban, which is more about actually delivering the work. So we have a system of discovery and delivery. We have a system, in this case, where discovery precedes the delivery. First we have the discovery, the upstream part, and then we have the delivery, which is the downstream part. So it is a Kanban system. Now, the applicability of this. So it's very broadly applicable, and broadly applicable in most types of organizations because of the way we structure projects, because of the way we structure development. Often we structure development in a way that discovery actually precedes delivery. Okay? Now, this is a manifestation of a managerial approach, which is present in most organizations, in many organizations, which is we know the goal, we know what we want to achieve, we have a set of means, and we have some kind of model, maybe not an explicit model, but an implicit model. We have some kind of model in our minds that helps us to say, how can we apply those means to achieve that goal, right? So the goal is given, we know the outcome, we predict the outcome. The means are kind of given, we know what we need to do, and we can also know how to do it. So we have a goal in terms of achieving some business targets. The means are the developments that we need to do, okay? And then we have a system of selecting the user stories, the how, selecting the requirements to achieve that goal, okay? So this is a managerial mindset or a managerial approach where we say that we can know our goals up front, and we can also know how we can achieve those goals up front, right? Now, this is, in many organizations, this is the way we approach most of the development that we do and most of the knowledge work that we do, Okay. Now the applicability of that is, in practice, the applicability of that is it has a limited applicability, right? It has an applicability in the area or the situation that we call the post-hypothesis situation. The post-hypothesis situation is a situation where the why, the how, and the what can all be known up front. So in this case, on the little picture here, the why, we know the goal. It's very clear. We can see the goal, right? We know what the goal is. We know how to achieve, we know what we need to do. There's different paths that may lead to the goal, but we have a map. We have a model that allows us to look up and find the best path to achieve the goal, right? We might even have a model that tells us, that helps us to find the most efficient way to achieve the goal, right? Now, the preconditions for this is that you need to know your goal up front, and you need to have a map, a model that helps you to see how you can achieve that goal before you actually start reaching that goal. Okay? Is that the type of situation that you are in your current business? Is that the environment that you are in your business? Yeah, kind of. You know your goal, and you know for sure what that goal will bring in your business? Kind of. Almost. Yeah. Is that the kind of situation that you're in?
Yeah, you never know completely.
You never know completely.
You always guess.
You always guess. Yeah. Yeah.
It is always changing. Sure.
And it's always changing, right? Okay. So, if we're talking about knowledge work, not all knowledge work is the same. Not all knowledge work is alike. Yeah. This is one kind of knowledge work, and I admit this is the dominant type of that we have in most organizations today. But there's other types of knowledge work. Surely, if we talk about post-hypothesis, right? Post-hypothesis, the why, the how, and the what can be known up front. Yeah. If we talk about post-hypothesis, then surely there must be a phase before that, which is called the hypothesis phase. Yeah. The hypothesis phase is the phase where we don't know everything up front, or not everything is knowable up front. Yeah. Only a little part of it is known up front. We might know the goal, but we don't know how to achieve that goal. Okay. Can you imagine a situation in your current business where you know the goal, but you don't know how to achieve that goal? Can you give an example? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, a very trivial example is you have a target of revenue X, which is much higher than what you expected. You don't know how to achieve it.
Yeah, for example.
I'll give you a practical day life example, maybe losing weight.
Oops.
We don't know how to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Improvement. Yeah, improvement. We know the goal, we might know the goal, but we don't know how to get there. I'm doing some coaching in a logistics center, not software, just in logistics. Yeah, they know their goal. Right? They know that they have to achieve a certain set of lead times. They've grown to a point that it's hard to sustain those lead times. The lead times are really the promises that they make to their customers. If you order a part, we will deliver that part by then. The goal is very clear. The question is, how do we achieve that goal? That's hard, right? Okay. You have a software development. You have a development. You might have some expectations from your customers in terms of lead times, quality, stuff like that. You know what your goal is. But how do you achieve that goal? Okay. So that's on the process area. On the product area, this might be the same. you're a game developer. You want to achieve a certain number of subscribers, so you know what your goal is. But how do you achieve that goal? Okay. So in many cases, many situations, knowledge work is not the known, but knowledge work is the unknown, the known unknown. Yeah? We know what we don't know. We know that we don't know how to get there. Surely, if there's an hypothesis phase, there must be a pre-hypothesis phase. Yeah? So within the hypothesis phase, we start from a hypothesis. A hypothesis, in the end, a hypothesis about our goal. The hypothesis that we can achieve that goal. Okay. Now, where do those hypotheses come from? So that's the pre-hypothesis phase. That's the phase where you don't even know what you don't know yet. Yeah? You don't know your goal. Yeah? So that's also a type of knowledge work, right? And it's a very recurring situation, especially in big chaotic organizations. This occurs a lot. Yeah? We don't know what we don't know yet. Yeah? And then underlying that, all of that, yeah? Knowledge work is also riddled with hidden assumptions. Yeah? There's a lot of hidden assumptions that we make. Yeah? We all are biased. If we talk about knowledge work, that means that knowledge becomes part of what we do. Much of the knowledge that we acquire, we become so familiar with that we don't even think about what knowledge that we are applying. And so we make a lot of hidden assumptions. We don't know. We don't know anymore what we actually know. Yeah, we know it, but we don't know that we know it. Right? Okay. So we covered the post-hypothesis because we started there because I think that's the situation where most of you are familiar with. But we'll go through it in the order of post-hypothesis. We've covered that, hypothesis, pre-hypothesis, and then hidden assumptions. Okay, so the hypothesis situation is a situation where you have some kind of goal. It might be shrouded behind, it might be hidden a little bit behind the clouds. So you have some kind of goal. Yeah? And there may be multiple paths, so you don't really know how to achieve that goal. And if you have a map, it's a map that's not complete. Yeah? So you still have to fill in some of the blanks in your model, right? So the why is defined, the how is discovered. So this is the idealistic approach. Yeah? It's called an idealistic approach. This is a terminology by Dave Snowden. So it's called the idealistic approach because we make some projection of the ideal future. The ideal future is that we make a certain revenue target. The ideal future is that we can grow with our organization without compromising our lead times. The ideal situation is that we can lose weight. So we make some vision about the ideal future. Then we look at the gap and we try to close the gap. So we know what we want to achieve, but we don't know how yet. So according to your opinion, what is the approach that you follow here? What is what would be the approach to do this? Analyze a lot, do a lot of analysis, and then execute without looking back? Sorry?
Probably the idea is to take small steps,
Mm-hmm.
measure, see if you are near of your goal, and
Yes.
taking small steps and go. And
Indeed.
survive it.
So an experimental approach. Yeah. So the scientific method. Who's heard about PDCA? Yeah, Plan, Do, Check, Act. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the approach that we take here. The picture here is taken from improvement kata. Yeah, yeah. So this is the approach that is also taken with improvement kata. Okay. So the scientific method, we create a hypothesis. Yeah? We speculate about what would be a next achievable target. We do an experiment. Yeah? We try it out. Preferably an experiment that that is allowed to fail, right? Okay. If you bet your entire company, then that's not an experiment. Eh? So best an experiment that you can run in a way that that it can fail, because if it can't fail, then it's not an experiment, then it's uncertainty, right? So you design and run that experiment, and you look back, you measure. Yeah, you measure in designing setting up the hypothesis, in designing the experiment, you set out what you expect, and then you check, you measure whether that expectation has been met. And if it's not been met, you adjust your model. If it has been met, what do you do then? So you have a successful experiment. Yeah, you extend it. Yeah, so you've done your pilot, for example, and then you're ready to start rolling it out, maybe to other places in the organization. You've done a successful minimum viable product, and it has been successful. So now you're ready for growth. Yeah, so you need to grow further. Okay. So this is a visualization of that. Yeah, it's called an experiment Kanban. Yeah, it's a visualization of the plan, do, check, act process, or the plan, do, check, adjust process, right? So you have a backlog of hypotheses that you make, yeah, that you have. So you have your overall goal. In terms of achieving your overall goal, you formulate a number of hypotheses. That's your backlog. You turn those hypotheses into experiments, planning. Yeah. You run those experiments. You check the results. And if those experiments are done, you learn. Yeah, you adjust. Okay. Again, yeah. The reason why we put this board up is because there might be different people collaborating around it. Yeah? In the example that I've given, the logistics center, right? It's a large logistics center. If you do this by your own, as one person, visualization might not be needed, right? But if there's multiple persons involved in doing the process improvement, yeah, a Kanban board can help. It can help in terms of the collaboration between all those people that are actually involved in doing the improvement. Okay. Is this a Kanban system?
If it has a whip limit,
what
it seems to be having.
Yeah. What would be the purpose of a whip limit here?
Yeah, changing as little stuff as possible at the same time.
Yeah.
Not changing too much.
Too much at the same
That
time.
might be dangerous.
Yeah. So it's not really a work in progress limit, because your concern is not maybe work, but your concern is that if you do too many experiments at the same time, it's hard to interpret the results, right? So you've got some kind of experiment in progress limit, right? Who's used this type of Kanban board before? Yeah. Okay. Very advisable. Huh? If you're into process in improving, if you're into improving, then it really helps to visualize all the improvement that you're doing. Yeah. I'll talk about a second instantiation of this, a second version of this later on. And then it's a similar visualization, and if you combine those two, it gives you a very good view on how a certain type of improvement is going. Okay, now validated learning. Is that the same process? Who's familiar with Lean Startup, validated learning? Okay, so the process is kind of the same. It's delivering a product in an area of uncertainty, So you might have an hypothesis about what you want to achieve with your product in terms of delivering a business. But rather than doing a big development and then finding out that nobody cares for your product, you build a minimum viable product. It's an experiment. You have some hypothesis about what that experiment will bring to your organization. You measure the results, and you learn. So actually, it's kind of the same process that we follow. Not a plan, do, check, act in your process, but a build, measure, learn in terms of improving your product. So the hypothesis here is not a hypothesis about the performance of your process, for example, but it's a hypothesis about if we build this feature, then we think that there will be a certain outcome for a certain set of users. And we actually will define up front what we expect to see in order to know whether we're successful or whether we are failing. Again, many people are starting to experiment with this type of Kanban board where you actually visualize your MVPs, your product experiments through a build, measure, learn Kanban board. So it's the same type of Kanban board as the PDCA, but then applied in your product development. Who's been looking at this type of board? So what I see today is that people are starting to add a validate column to their Kanban board, right? So they're starting to add a validate board. So maybe they're not using exactly this type of board, but gradually there's this validate column on the board. Okay, so what this type of Kanban systems in this area of knowledge work point out is the value of creating options, right? So if you build an MVP and you measure and you see that it's successful, what you just created is an option to grow in the future, right? So what you've started to create is creating options for your organization, right? Options to choose from, right? We've done a number of experiments. We learned from those experiments, and there's different options that we go through. Yeah, we can now say maybe we can take that direction. Yeah, or maybe we can take that direction. So you've created options for your organization. Yeah. Now you see the interplay between the known known and the known unknown. Here we're creating the options. In the post hypothesis phase, we're actually selecting from those options to go through a certain commitment. Yeah. So you can imagine that if you combine those two situations, where on the one hand you have a process upstream, downstream, where you use those options, you execute those options, and you deliver. On the other hand, you have this process in terms of creating options, future options for your product or your process for your organization. So those two fit well together. Okay, now there's also a pre-hypothesis phase. I think I need to speed up a little bit because of time. Yeah, 10 minutes, so I need to speed up a little bit. So there's also a pre-hypothesis. In the previous part, we started from an hypothesis. But then obviously this begs the question, where do these hypotheses come from, right? So that's the pre-hypothesis. We don't know what our goal is. We don't even know what our goal is. The only thing that we know is this guy has got a rucksack and there's all kinds of things in his rucksack. There might be skis in his rucksack. There might be boots in there. Yeah. So he has a set of means that he can apply, or she, yeah. And then with those means, we will discover a goal. Yeah, we will discover what the real goal is. So we don't know our goal up front. this is the entrepreneurial situation. Yeah? This is what an entrepreneur does. Yeah? Now that's also knowledge work. Okay? Now, the reason why even in large organizations this is interesting is because there's much need for entrepreneurship in big organizations. So also in big, it's not just for small organizations, also in big organizations, that entrepreneurship is really, really relevant. Okay? So entrepreneurship means that we have a set of given means, we know people, we have a network, we know stuff, we have skills, we might have some technology, some intellectual property, we know what we have. We might have a number of goals that might be possible goals, but we don't know which goal is really worthwhile. Which is the pot of gold? We don't know which is the goal that is the most relevant goal to achieve. So that's what entrepreneurship is about. I'm not going to go too much into detail. There is, like the scientific method, which starts from the cause and looks at the effect. There's also a type of reasoning which is called effectual reasoning. I think it's worthwhile to look at, which is about how can we start from the effects, and it's called effectuation. Yeah. Okay, the person Saraswati, Professor Saraswati, has done research on how expert entrepreneurs work, and that's how this is a distillation of her findings, right? So the focus is on what you can do, not what you ought to do. Yeah? The focus is on just what can I do today with the means that I'm given, with whom I know, what can I do? And I just do something. Constraints will pop up, right? The goals and the network of people that will achieve those goals, they will start to converge, right? You do something. By doing something, you create new means. Doing something means going after a certain opportunity. And by going after that opportunity, that will create some means. And with those means, there comes constraints. For example, you've gone after a certain opportunity. That means that you have a customer. Well, that customer will impose a constraint on you because you will have to support that customer. So constraints will start to build up. Yeah? And by those constraints, your future options for the future, yeah, will start to diminish. So you will start to see a certain goal emerging. So that's the effectuation process. Now, the best type of Kanban that I've seen and that I think is relevant in this case is just an action Kanban. Yeah, it's just executing actions, right? Now, most of the time I see many organizations using a PDCA Kanban for this purpose, plan, do, check, act, but it's not really a PDCA Kanban. It's just an action Kanban. It's not actions on, it's not experiments that are managed on this Kanban board. It's just actions. We plan an action, we execute an action, we verify whether that action has been executed properly, and if not, we adjust, right? This is a very simple Kanban board, but very powerful, right? In situations where it's all chaos, yeah, there's lots of things going on, you don't know what you don't know, you don't even know the goal, yeah? Starting with this type of Kanban board can already start creating some stability, and then goals will start to emerge, constraints will start to pop up. Okay, so the last situation is a situation where we have a lot of hidden assumptions. Yeah? Constraints will start to pop up, right? So we start with a lot of options, a lot of things that we can do. We start doing things, and the more we do things, the more constraints that are imposed upon. And if we do go even further than that, yeah, we're just overly committed to one type of thing. Yeah? This is where many organizations are in today, right? Kodak, Nokia, just those are the examples where there was an overcommitment to a certain path, yeah? And because of that overcommitment, yeah. Now those are all big stories, right? But this type of thing happens also on the small, right? It happens also at the team level. So this is called path dependence. Because of the knowledge that we acquire, we put on blinders, our scope narrows. So we start with many possibilities, but as we go through the hypothesis phase and through the post-hypothesis phase, those options start to narrow down up until the point that we stop seeing everything else. We only see what has been in our past. Okay, so this is the, sorry for going back. So this is what this little guy finds here. He's got a map in his back, but he doesn't even know that he's got a map in his back. So he just follows the same path every time, right? And what he doesn't see is the invisible gorilla that is on his path, because he just follows the path blindly. And it's the invisible gorilla that might hurt him, right? But even more important, what he doesn't even see neither is the ugly baby, the ugly duckling here, that might turn into a beautiful swan, right? You know the story about the ugly duckling and the swan, yeah? So he doesn't see it anymore, yeah? He just knows his own path, okay? So that's the hidden assumptions, the unknown known. Okay, so this is where weak signals come into play. The invisible gorillas. Our blinders are on, so we don't see the threats anymore. Again, I refer to the stories of like Kodak and the Tower Record Shop and all those kind of stories. There were all kinds of signals that they could have seen, but that they didn't see to react to their environment. So that's the story of the invisible gorillas. Now that's a very negative story. That's a story in terms of things that I don't see that might hurt me. But there's also this notion of the ugly babies. So I love this book by Ed Catmull from Pixar, who says that, and the quote, I think the quote is very good. Every movie that we make, Pixar has been very successful in creating movies, right? Every movie that we make, the beginning of it, it's really very bad. It's a very terrible. So they have this pitching type of sessions where movie makers pitch their idea, and they says every time, over and over again, it starts like a very bad idea. But we nurture it. Yeah? We nurture it into a very successful movie. Yeah? So having attention to those ugly babies is really important, because that ugly baby might be your success for the future, right? So the process that can be followed here, again, because of time, I can't go into too much detail, is the OODA loop, the strategic decision loop that was created by Boyd. So if you have PDCA on the one hand, the equivalent of that in the very uncertain, the unknown known, is the equivalent of that is OODA. It's the Boyd loop. Was developed in military, right? Has the same roots as Clausewitz. Yeah? Boyd was a fighter pilot, and he developed that in terms of how do you react in a fighter plane when somebody is on your tail. Yeah? And so very important is good observation. Observation without making assumptions. Good orientation, good decisions, and then taking those actions. And moving through that loop very fast, faster than your opponent. Okay. So a visualization, a Kanban system that supports that.
I have a question about the picture before. When you go from orientation directly to action, how do you apply that? How do you see that in our world?
Yeah. So the OODA loop starts from a position of adversity. You have an adversary. Now, in most situations, for example, if you're running a big program, it's not an adversity that you have, but there is a changing environment. Okay, and so moving through the OODA loop very fast is important because your adversary, your enemy, might be more quicker to make decisions. If you can make decisions quicker than your opponent, then you can win, right? Now, in most of our situations, we don't really have a direct opponent, but we have an environment that is changing all the time. So moving through the loop very quickly is important in order to cope with the changing environment, right? If you're too slow to go through this loop, the environment changes and it overcomes you. If you move through the loop very quickly, you are faster than the environment, so you can anticipate. Okay? So moving directly from orient to act is like muscle reflexes, right?
Dinosaur brain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, indeed. System one. Yeah, system one. Okay, so a Kanban system for visualizing that: observe, orient, decide, act.
Can you provide a very quick reference to system 1 on this Kanban's book? Just point to Kanban's.
Yeah, Kanban, voila. Okay, so this is a Kanban system that helps you to deal with that. I've been setting up such Kanban. I don't think does anybody have an experience with this type of Kanban system? Observe, orient, decide, act. Yeah, I've been setting up these types of Kanban systems in large programs, for example, to elicit issues, risks, opportunities from the organization, from the team. Yeah? Things that the team can observe, that they can collaborate around, make decisions around, and then act accordingly. And again, it's a Kanban system in terms of you want to limit the number of decisions in progress at the same time. Okay. So we can put this all together, yeah? So we started with a trigger for action, a decision that we made. That action creates constraints, so that turned into a vision. We have some hypotheses about how to achieve that vision. We experiment. From those experiments, a certain model emerges, yeah? And that model creates options that we can commit to, we deliver, yeah? And then we're at the point that we are overcommitted, so we need to take care of good observation, look at the weak signals, and then we're back into a loop. Yeah? Now, in most knowledge work, I do think this is the type of loop that most knowledge workers go through, and we have Kanban systems that support that. So I do think we have Kanban systems that support that help to manage knowledge work in a very general sense of the work. Okay, I think we need to break. Yeah, we need to stop.